Welcome back to the Satanist podcast. Today I'm joined by Aditya Prakash, who many of you may know as Soytheist. If you don't already know Soytheist, he is somebody who uses his position as a member of a marginalised society within a so-called third world country to fight for the animals. He takes a straightforward approach to identity politics and animal rights in a way that many are afraid to, at the risk of facing baseless accusations. In this episode of the Satanist podcast, we'll be discussing veganism in India, as well as whether veganism is privileged, colonialist, or racist. As always, don't forget to like this video if you're listening on YouTube to help the algorithm promote my content. And if you're not already, don't forget to subscribe. Could you just explain a little bit about yourself and what made you want to go vegan?
Okay, so I was raised in this certain part of India, which is quite culturally different from the rest of India. It's like the northeastern part. If you look at the map, it's the part that kind of sticks out in the eastern side, right?
Okay.
Anyway, so this region is like the region that I'm from. The culture is more like heavy meat eating culture. Like when people think of India, they would think like, oh, it's a vegetarian country, which is of course different from veganism. But that's the sort of perception around India. Well, not in my part of India. So I was raised in this very heavy meat eating culture, and I did not really think at all about animal rights and animal ethics for quite a while. Until I was about age 14, when I decided to sort of go to the market, and like that day I would like bring home like the meat, right?
Yeah.
And here in India, the way it works is like the slaughter does not go on like behind closed doors, right? You can see it. You can see the animal going from like the live animal to it being killed to it being cut up into little pieces, and the meat being like put into little plastic bags, right? You can see all of that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So like I told the butcher that, I'd like some meat. Like this is the amount I want. This is the amount I've been told by my family that I need to bring home. So could you just do that? And like as he was proceeding to kill the goat, right? I saw like the goat was really scared. And he was like, the goat was kind of trying to get away, like, and struggling, right? And then I saw that, and it like it did not shock me. Like I expected that. I kind of tolerated that, right? Like this is already what I expected. But the thing that hit me, right? The thing that kind of like the thing that I did not expect was that there was this other goat, that other baby goat, in fact, that was trying to hide. Like this is not the goat that was like being killed. The other goat was trying to hide behind this small kind of rock. And I saw that, and that kind of hit me, right? That kind of hit me, and I realized that this is exactly what I would be doing if I were in the place of that goat, right? I would try to hide, especially because it's like maybe less than a year old, right? It's a tiny goat. So I told the butcher, like, hold on, I forgot something. I forgot the money. I'll be right back. And then I kind of like don't kill him yet. And the goat probably ended up being killed anyway. But I left from there, right? And I decided that, like I could not be contributing to this anymore. So people talk about a journey and baby steps to veganism. Some people talk about overnight, right? They think about it overnight. They think about it for a day and then they go vegan. For me, it was more of a on the spot thing, right?
Wow. Okay.
And it's like, it's not a compliment to me, I suppose, because it's just the way I was raised, that like my reaction to it is not something that I was controlling, right? My reaction to it was, of course, because of my sort of the way I was raised, the way my brain is wired.
Yeah.
And so like different people would have different reactions. So that's just how it was for me. It's not a compliment to me. It's just I was just fortunate enough to have been able to realize it that quickly. So yeah, that's how I went vegetarian. Because not because I thought that, oh, dairy is kind of acceptable, even though it's cruel. I just did not know what
No, most
milk
people
was,
don't,
right? when I saw that, right, I immediately realized that this is happening to the goat. This is exactly what happens to chickens and ducks, and like, so I could not be like it all instantly connected. But dairy just seems like something different. And for like 2 years after that, I just never realized, and so I kept I kept consuming dairy. But 2 years later, I don't exactly remember what it was, but I came across information about dairy, and then I looked into it, like what dairy is. Most people don't realize what dairy is. Dairy, any mammal produces milk not because like they want to give it to another
Yeah.
different species of mammals. They produce it for their own babies. And I realized that how this would be produced for human beings by exploiting cows mainly, and maybe buffaloes, right? So I learned about that, and again, that was an immediate on the spot thing for me, because it's just applying the same kind of reasoning and applying it to the case of dairy.
Sure.
So there's that.
And I guess at that point, in sort of Indian terms, that would make you full veg then. Is that right?
So the term that often gets used is pure veg, and I kind of despise that term, because like it makes veganism about something about purity, and the reason this pure terminology comes in, it relates to this despicable thing, which is called the caste system, right? So Indian society would be like divided into various so-called castes, right? So and the thing to realize about these castes is that there is no biological difference between people belonging to different so-called castes. It is just arbitrarily decided.
Is it skin color? Is that right?
No.
No. Oh,
It's
okay.
just arbitrary. And different castes are supposed to be involved in different kinds of activities, right? So anyway, so the upper caste people, right? They have this, they have various things that they want to maintain. One of the things that they want to maintain is something called caste purity. And one of the ways that they would do this is, for example, they would consider the flesh of non-human animals to be like impure, right? And and like they don't eat the flesh of non-human animals. Some non-human animals, not all, they would still be eating, I suppose, chickens and goats and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But they would not eat cows, right? So there's this notion of purity, and the people belonging to the so-called lower caste, they, like pretty much every other person in the world, they would consume the flesh of non-human animals. And there is, again, there is more like detail and nuance about why these lower castes have a culture of consuming the flesh of non-human animals, and it relates to how they're marginalized, so they have to rely on any source of food that they can get, right? That's the sort of historical explanation. But anyway, that's not a reason to continue it today, of course, but that's how it has been historically for many centuries.
Okay.
So the upper caste people, they kind of try to maintain this caste purity amongst other things, and that's where you get this term pure veg. And pure veg, however, involves dairy. So yeah, it's very different from veganism. Veganism is, of course, like quite opposite to all of this, about maintaining this hierarchy of castes, because veganism is, of course, giving equal moral consideration to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Every sentient individual. So that obviously implies necessarily that you would give equal moral consideration to every human being, right? That necessarily implies that. So veganism is, of course, the opposite of the caste system.
So by calling yourself pure veg, you're kind of saying you accept this caste system.
Not necessarily, but like I suppose not everyone who calls themselves pure veg knows the history of why the term exists in that manner.
Okay.
Like, yeah, that's why I suppose, because there's nowhere else in the world, at least where I'm aware of, that people call themselves pure vegetarian and vegetarian. So yeah.
So how is it these days? Are people still accepting of this system?
This is like an oversimplification, but the way I would like try to explain that quickly is that it is sort of like race relations in the United States, in that it has like this discrimination, and all of it has been legally abolished, right? Legally abolished, but this notion of like just as how in the United States there are some people on the fringe who have this notion of like white supremacy, right, that white people are superior to every other race. There would be some people in India who have this notion that the caste system was like a real thing and a useful thing, and they have that notion in their heads. And because such people exist, both in the United States and in India, uh, there is there is real discrimination that occurs because that notion exists in people's heads. But it is important to note that it has been legally abolished.
Okay, let's just go back to veganism then. So you've given up the dairy, you've given up the meat. Where are we on eggs?
Well, like I never, like when I went vegetarian, I was here in India, vegetarian just simply means no eggs. So I stopped eating eggs like in 2014, right? So yeah, like to me that like I was able to make that connection immediately because I just realized that eggs are like a possible life, right? Possible sentient life. So
Okay, because
I've thought about it more now, and there's of course better reasons to not eat eggs. But at that moment, when I was like, okay, I've not told anyone how old I am, so I went vegetarian in 2014, right? So, and I was 14 years old then. So
okay,
at that time, like to the mind of a 14-year-old, like that was just the immediate, uh, like the rationalization that eggs are also like not acceptable. Yeah.
okay, that's pretty illogical to be fair, especially for a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
So I know India is a big place, so it's difficult to ask questions that just generalize. So if you feel that these questions can't be generalized to India, we can stick to your province. That's fine. So how common is veganism in India?
Right. So when I went vegan in 2016, right, 2 years after I went vegetarian, I told people I'm vegan, and like people asked, like, "Are you like mispronouncing vegetarian?" uh, so, so that was the scenario back then. Right now, like people understand what veganism means. At least, like more people understand what veganism means.
Okay.
And like recently, like when you asked me for like invited me to do this collaboration, like I just thought to myself, let me just also look for vegan Indian YouTubers, like maybe I could do collabs with them as well. And well, I could find just one that was like that one person is like 34,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
Like no one else on YouTube. So I think like obviously like the internet is not a hard and fast rule to like to say like where the state of veganism in India, but it kind of gives you an idea, right? Because like if you look for American vegan YouTubers, you'll find many.
Yeah.
But like in India, well, there's just not that many. So I suppose the vegan movement, it's kind of like in the early stages, like much earlier stages in India than it is like in somewhere like the United States. And like, for example, plant-based alternatives to like like animal-based foods. And I say alternatives because like normal plant-based foods like vegetables and rice and dals, those are very easily accessible.
Yeah.
But things like plant-based milk, right, and let's say vegan chocolate and plant-based meat, these things are like not available. So that again signifies how much veganism is of a thing. Like I could tell you the exact amount of plant-based milk that I have ever drank, and that is 3 liters. And the reason I can tell you that is because I bought 3 liters of soy milk
Yeah.
online to kind of just try it out, and then that was it because I can't find it near me. So yeah, that's like that kind of gives you an idea of where veganism is, veganism and animal rights, of course.
Okay. And what do people think about veganism? Do they think of it like a diet? Do they think people are sort of crazy or annoying? Are they good people?
I suppose it depends on like who they come across, right? Like the people who know me, right, my classmates, my friends, like I make it absolutely certain that they know that this is about animal rights, right?
Yeah.
Like they follow me on social media, and they see my, maybe they don't watch my YouTube videos, but at least they see the titles and the thumbnails, right? And they understand that it's about animal rights. I suppose if someone was like were to come across a sort of food blogger, a vegan food blogger, they would think of it as a diet. But that's just a general rule. But the reason I'm talking about that is because like it's again veganism in such early stages. Like Like it really depends. Like people, like it really depends on who you know, right? So like, it's not like in the Western country, like where you would be exposed to veganism from news outlets and from
Okay.
like popular media and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it depends on who you know.
So the main way people know about veganism is through people they know.
Yeah, mostly because
Ah,
it's not
okay.
in the news very much, right?
Okay, so I've heard that in India, the relationship with animals is very different to somewhere like the UK or the US. I think that goes back to religion and that kind of thing. Would you agree with that?
I suppose the relationship would be different based on like where you are. But like if the question is like is it better? Like I wouldn't say so. No.
Mm,
Like the perception that I've seen in like most Western circles, and like people even talk about like the roots of veganism. And they talk about how India and like African cultures. I don't know about African cultures, but India, like the Indian, at least the general culture in India is not one of like animal rights, and like it's just the same as everywhere else to me. Like in terms of being close to where I would ultimately want it to end up.
I think a lot of these sort of, I don't know whether to call them misconceptions, but a lot of these ideas about India and a lot of countries is that it's romanticized in the West as somewhere you'll never go, but it's this magical kind of place. So we get these ideas that maybe are not 100% based in fact, you know? But one of the main ones, there is a certain relationship with cows in India to do with Hinduism, I think, right?
The problem there would be that most people they just claim to care about cows, right?
Okay.
Right. India is amongst the largest. It's the second, like it keeps fluctuating year by year, but it's always in the top five exporters of beef in the world.
Yeah.
And India has one of the largest leather industries in the world, mostly from cows and buffaloes. So there's that. And like Hinduism, right? Like people say, like Hindus, they would say that they care about cows, but at the end of the day, it's just like everyone else. It's not something specifically like wrong. Like it's not, I'm not saying as if like they are doing something specifically worse than like let's say like the average American,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's not better, right? And they don't see a problem with like the exploitation of cows for milk, right? That is perfectly fine to them. They would say that cows are like their mothers, but this is just not how, like that's not true. First of all, right?
Right.
Like because like your mother is necessarily someone of your own species. It feels just ridiculous just having to explain that. But yeah, like they kind of view cows as like, I don't know if they view cows in that manner, but the implication of their actions is like that they've reduced cows to milk producing machines.
Yeah.
They don't view them as like sentient individuals, and that's mostly like people who would be leaning right, like on the political spectrum, sociologically. Like it's polarized. India is polarized. So people on the left would not like usually would not agree with anything that people on the right says. Right? So like
Okay.
someone on the right could say like 2 + 2 = 4, and like hold on a minute, the reaction would be hold on a minute. And it goes the other way, like similar. Like if someone on the left says that, the reaction from the right would be again very
Right.
similar. It's the same as like a lot of places in the world right now. But when people on the right wing say that they like care for cows, even though they don't, the reaction from the left is, oh, they care about cows, therefore we will kill cows. Within this like political differences between the left wing and the right wing, the individuals that suffer are ultimately non-human animals,
Yeah.
right? And people will use any kind of excuse to justify this exploitation.
But I think the same as the rest of the world, we do tend to think of cows as just milk animals. You know, I don't anymore, obviously, neither do you. But but we don't really think, oh yeah, a lot of cows are killed for beef too. Even the dairy cows, once they're spent,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But people don't really know about this. So in India, do people understand that cows are going to be killed for beef?
Yeah, like if you point it out to them. But yeah, like mostly people who would say like I won't eat beef, yeah, mostly I think they don't realize like what's going to happen to the cow. Like they like you'll have to point it out to them. Yeah, mostly they don't realize. Yeah.
I think it's one of those, you point it out and it's suddenly obvious.
Mhm.
I'm sure you've had these kind of conversations with people then. What's the reaction like?
They're surprised, I suppose. That would be the word. And they say that killing cows is wrong. Like most people would say killing cows is wrong for religious reasons, which are of course not the right reasons. But anyway, yeah, they're surprised. It instantly hits them. Like I asked them, like, what do you think happens to the cows once they stop producing milk after 5 years? Like, because they're not going to be producing milk until they're like the end of their life, which is like 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, they kind of realize like it's not something like you could argue against. Like it's almost obvious, because like it's a very bad business decision to kind of like, if you're running your business on the exploitation of someone else, yeah, if you won't be looking after them once they're no longer useful to you.
So do you have a lot of success then with people giving up dairy?
For some reason, no.
Mm.
Like they kind of like they say that they'll think about it, and then they kind of continue anyway.
Sort of, I'll think about it, but actually I'll just try not to think about it. Yeah, I get that. Are there sort of safe movements and cubes of truth and that kind of thing going on?
They do have one in India. Like there is Animal Save India, there is PETA India. So there are these organizations. I'm not sure there are Cube of Truth events, but yeah, Cube of Truth is more of an anonymous for the voiceless thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think if they have a branch here, because I think they're a much smaller organization relatively. I'm not sure.
You brought up PETA India, and
Yeah.
as far as I can see, they keep finding themselves at the center of controversy inside India, as if they're attacking farmers, or I can't remember the big company now. Amul, is that right?
Amul, yeah, Amul.
Do you know much about this story?
Yeah, so PETA urged Amul to switch to producing plant-based milk. And Amul is, of course, like a huge dairy company in India. Amul is pretty much the dairy industry in India.
Okay.
So it has a monopoly. So the PETA urged Amul to switch to plant-based milk. And Amul did not take that very well. And they tried to label PETA as a foreign conspiracy.
Right.
And then they talked about the jobs of all those farmers. The farmers, like they are involved in dairy farming, well, because like they have money, like that's the way they can make money. But of course, if there were other industries, they would make money from those industries. So yeah, so Amul did that. Like, it kind of used the suffering of farmers, which is of course incomparable to the suffering of like the non-human animals. But anyway, it's like the farmers, Amul used their plight, I suppose, as an excuse to continue investing in dairy.
Right.
So that was the whole thing, and and they said that they will kind of try to reach out. In fact, they did reach out to the prime minister. I'm pretty sure the prime minister did not respond.
Oh, good.
But yeah, that was the whole thing. That was the whole thing. Yeah.
From what you've seen, what was the public's opinion on this?
So the thing is that the mostly right-wing people in India, they were like on the side of Amul, right? The left-wing people just simply did not care. And then when it's time for Eid, right, the Muslim festival, then Amul, not Amul, sorry, PETA goes after like encourages people like to not consume, like to not participate in animal sacrifice and that kind of stuff. At that point, like the left wing just comes in saying, "Oh, you can't do that."
Okay.
Right. Like,
defending the right to kill. Okay.
Defending the right to kill and oppress and torture, I suppose. Just as the right wing people defended the right to torture and exploit in the case of dairy. Here it's the left wing people doing the exact same thing in the case of meat. And in this scenario, the right wing people just don't care.
It does sound like what you said. They're more interested in fighting each other than fighting for whatever's right. In your activism, what have you noticed as the main obstacle standing in people's way?
I don't think there's like any particular obstacle. The obstacle would be just, well, excuses. Because I make this point a lot. People seem to think The one that people would say is an obstacle is like veganism is privilege. You need money. That's just not true. Veganism costs more money if you think of things like the cost of almond milk, right? If you think that a Starbucks latte is like a basic need, even though it's not.
Yeah.
Once you kind of like step away from that privileged bubble, right? You realize that the cheapest foods in the market are like all plant-based, right? Rice and dals, and I'll give you some like the ones that are commonly available in India: rice and dal, and what we would call rajma. It's kidney beans, um,
Okay.
right? And chickpeas, right? What we would call chola. And the whole array of vegetables, I suppose. So these things are like incredibly cheap. So like you don't have to be drinking Starbucks latte, almond milk or oat milk Starbucks latte every day or at all
Mm.
to be vegan. You can just eat these things. So yeah, it's not an obstacle. This is the only one that people would say is an obstacle. But yeah, it's not an obstacle. So the only obstacles, I suppose, would be the excuses. One more would be, I suppose, saying that, they kind of trying to oppose the caste system by eating meat, which is, of course, like nonsense, because like if you're trying to oppose the caste system by like oppressing non-human animals, then you've kind of created your own caste system, right?
Right.
Where you place non-human animals at the bottom and you like place yourself above them. So you're not like kind of opposing the hierarchy, the moral hierarchy of the caste system, right, which places different human beings on different levels of moral worth. You're not opposing that system. You're just trying to look for your place in that hierarchy.
Yeah.
So that's, I suppose, one more obstacle, I suppose, that people would say is an obstacle, but it's not.
Do you think people are honest when they use these excuses? They believe it?
Some people, I think, do believe it. And in those cases, I suppose it's far more easier to convince them otherwise. But if someone is kind of using it as an excuse, then it's, of course, like, far more difficult to make them realize, like, not realize, supposed to accept the error in their reasoning.
Okay. For these two excuses, what's your way to deal with them?
I suppose just to point out, like what I just pointed out, and of course, it just goes like in the way that I would deal with every other excuse against veganism, or just in any other topic really. I would talk to people in the way that they talk. So the way I would talk to someone who is like super religious would not be the same way that I would talk to someone who is all about justice and uh,
Right.
abolishing oppressive systems and that kind of stuff. And that would be again completely different from how I would talk to someone who is all about love and kindness. So yeah, I just talk to them in the way that they talk. So if someone talks about privilege, I would say like, well, the reason you think it's a privilege is because of these reasons. But once you kind of look out of that, what do you think rice costs? What do you think potatoes cost? What do you think that costs? And the way I would deal with someone who says that it's the caste system, like they're opposing the caste system, is again I would just point out like, are you not placing non-human animals at lower level of moral worth in the same way that the upper caste people put the so-called upper caste people put the so-called lower caste people on a lower level? Are you not doing the exact same thing? So yeah, that's
Mm.
how I would talk to them. I'm influenced by a lot of people. This approach, I think, I've learned from Earthling Ed, like watching his videos. Like he just asks questions, right? So yeah.
Yeah. For me, anyway, I find the most success with asking questions because you're not telling them what to think. They have to work it out for themselves,
Yeah.
Okay. What is ghee and why is it in everything?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why it's in everything. Ghee is like butter, but it's just greater percentage of fats. It's like 99% fats, I think. I'm not quite sure why it's in everything. Because people view cows as like their mothers, they kind of try to get their blood. I'm not quite sure why it's in everything, but it has to do
Okay.
something with that viewing of cows as mothers. I suppose you'll have to ask them why they put,
Yeah.
put ghee in everything. Because even when I was like eating everything until I was like 13 or like 12, even then I like could like why is it here? So yeah.
Is it easy enough to avoid though?
If you're going to posh places, like they'll not put ghee, like they won't even have ghee. Like and like if you're in like a normal place, I suppose, even then it's not common. Like you would find ghee in products that are like in places that are like quite not cheap, but like this, like what I would call like the restaurants that you would find on highways, like where people stop between journeys and that kind of stuff. There they would like if you tell them that you don't want ghee, of course they'll keep that in mind, but you'll have to be very specific. You'll have to explain to them no milk, no butter, no ghee. You have, like, because you can't just say no dairy.
Oh, really?
Dairy to them just means milk, right? So you'll have to be very specific. You'll have to point out no ghee, no butter, no curd.
But it's not too difficult, right?
Yeah, like if you can communicate it, it's not difficult.
Is there anything else that you need to look out for if you're vegan and maybe visiting India?
You just have to communicate that don't consume these things. And like if you want to look for vegan places, I suppose like they would be like a little bit more like, because they're mostly aimed at, I don't know, for some reason they're aimed at tourists, right? And for that reason, because veganism is not that prevalent in India, specifically vegan restaurants, I suppose, they would be a bit more expensive, but I'm pretty sure they're like much cheaper than the costs that you would be accustomed to in the UK or the United States. It's very easy to be vegan in India. If you can communicate like that you don't consume dairy, it's all good. You just say you're vegetarian and you don't also consume these other things, and it's fine.
Okay. So just remember that list there: ghee, curd,
Butter,
milk, right? Butter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Easy. Okay, changing the topic a little bit now. In my experience, because I'm a straight white guy from the UK, I'm told that veganism is privileged, colonialism, and sometimes I'm even told it's racist. Okay. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on that?
Interestingly, I've made videos on these subjects. There was this video by the BBC which said like veganism is a privilege that is not accessible to all. And like I went through their claims one at a time. But yeah, it just comes back to that. Just the which vegan products you're looking at. If you're looking at like really posh things like Beyond Burgers and vegan milk and that kind of stuff, it's going to seem expensive. But again, one has to realize that those things are not a necessary part of veganism. So that's, I suppose, about privilege.
I even find, long-term vegans, if you have got access to all these vegan meats, they don't tend to eat them. Maybe they'll have them on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
I just eat vegetables.
Yeah, and like about colonialism. So this is again something I've talked about, which was quite interesting because like there's this person on TikTok. They made like this two-part TikTok
I know
video.
this one. Yeah.
and they were talking about, like, this was quite uncommon for me because like mostly people are like, oh, racism bad, and they kind of talk about like as if the United States is all that exists, right? Mostly Americans specifically do this for some reason. So this guy was American, but he was also talking about the global South, which is of course a projection of American politics onto the rest of the world, right? So he was talking about that, and he mentioned that veganism leans pretty hard into the colonialist mindset. His exact words were, expecting everyone to be vegan leans pretty hard into the colonialist mindset, because I don't want to, of course, misrepresent what he was saying. But anyway, I took that as someone from the global South, what he calls the global South, and I kind of debunked what he was saying. But the summary of that would be that, like, for example, when British colonialists came to India and kind of colonized India, the way that worked is they kind of viewed Indians arbitrarily as being of lower moral worth than like British people, right? Like Winston Churchill, the British hero, he said of Indians that he disliked Indians. I'm not sure the exact sentence, but he said that Indians are a beastly people with a beastly relation.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can look it up. So he said that. So all
He is controversial in the UK.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes you feel better.
Yeah, okay, that's good. But anyway, he said all of that. So that kind of represents the kind of mindset of British colonialists. And the thing to realize here is that that is exactly how non-vegans view non-human animals, right? Like people, meat eaters, and even vegetarians and flexitarians and all that kind of stuff. Basically, anyone who is not vegan, they view other animals in the way that British colonialists viewed India and Indians, right? So if anything is colonialist, if anything kind of leans into the colonialist mindset, it has to be how carnists, right, meat eaters and like people who consume dairy, how they view other animals. That leans into the colonialist mindset, not veganism.
I noticed that some activists avoid talking to people from other cultures and religions just because they're afraid of offending, or maybe they're afraid of being called a racist or a xenophobe or whatever. Do you think it's sensible for these people to avoid these interactions, or is it actually harming the vegan movement?
Ideally, I would not want them to like avoid these conversations. But I certainly understand from this looking at the cultural landscape, sort of like the global cultural landscape, why some people are afraid to like bring these conversations up. Because again, they will be accused of the things that you said they will be accused of, right? And that is where sort of where I come in, which is like not only am I someone who belongs to to use the word of that TikTok boy, live in the global South, or as some others would say, a third world country, right? A so-called third world country, to use Cold War language. But anyway, so not only do I belong to such a country, I belong to a sort of marginalized section of such a country, right? And not again, and not only is like, and that would be like referring to Northeast India, which is like marginalized within India. And not only am I Northeast Indian, I belong to a tribe which is marginalized within Northeastern India. So I have these, what I would call like wokeness points, right? So like when people, like whoever I'm talking to, right, the chances are that they are somehow in some manner more privileged than I am, at least like in terms of group identity, right? I would consider myself very fortunate in like in this life, right, despite what I just described. But at least how privilege is viewed in the current context, in the current world scenario, most people are more privileged in terms of group identity than me. So I don't have to worry about these things. So, and I think that animal rights is something that deserves a very straightforward approach. And even though I would want every activist to talk in that manner, I understand why they don't. I, of course, don't have to be worrying about these baseless accusations that take attention away from the non-human animals. And that's why I'm able to do what I do, which is like talk very candidly and in a very straightforward manner that is fitting of the severity of this moral atrocity.
Do you think there is any genuine reason not to go vegan?
So we have to be mindful of the definition of veganism. And the definition of veganism, I'm paraphrasing, is a lifestyle and a philosophy which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to non-human animals for, amongst other things, food, right? And the other things are like clothing and entertainment and that kind of stuff. So that part in the middle, as far as is possible and practicable, right? We have to be mindful of that, because none of us can be like truly abstain from all animal products. Like a certain currency, I'm not sure if that is the case now, but at least it was a while ago. Certain currency in your country, right, in the UK, like there was a big fast, right.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not sure if that's still the case, but in that case, right, like a person from the UK can't like, oh, I'll not take that currency. They can't do that, right? But what they can do is like they can like order maybe like a vegan pizza instead of like one filled with the corpses of non-human animals. So even though that person cannot abstain from all animal products, as no one can, they can abstain from it as far as is possible and practicable. And like that, with that definition of veganism in mind, you should always, even if you're like forced to like use certain animal products because of some reason, I don't know what those reasons could be, but even if it were the case hypothetically, you would still be vegan. So like keeping that in mind, there is absolutely no valid reason to not be vegan, because veganism involves that in the definition as far as is possible and practicable.
And what are the excuses that you're tired of hearing?
I suppose there are many. The ones that I deal with and I think are the most annoying would be these sort of the so-called leftist arguments, which we think like veganism is classist, which we've discussed at length during this podcast episode. It's not. Okay, there's this no ethical consumption under capitalism, so why even bother?
Right.
I've made a whole video about that. I've made like I provide 4 separate responses to that excuse, but I'll just state just one, which would be that just because an oppressive system is in place doesn't mean that you can justify any behavior within that system. There's this quote that went around last summer, which was that in a racist society, it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. I'm not sure if I agree with that kind of that kind of messaging, but at least that was very popular and people understood that, right? Just because the system is in place, you can't like justify everything. So I would change that a bit. I would say just because like in a racist society, I would say that it is enough to not be racist, and in a speciesist society, it is like in a very similar vein, you have to also not be speciesist. So yeah, so there's that. The other one that I would hear a lot is like respect cultures of minorities.
Right.
And that is, I think, ridiculous. Like no matter how marginalized someone might be, right? Then they're not kind of justified to cause harm onto others. I'll give you one example. India is one of the worst victims of British colonialism. The British Empire killed between 30 and 35 million Indians during the 200-year rule, and that involved everyone, right? All parts of India. But if you had someone from mainland India using that as an excuse, mainland India is, of course, I'm referring to all of India, which is not the Northeast. So if someone from mainland India, right, if mainland Indian used that as an excuse to harm someone like me and said, I'm oppressed myself, and then they said to you maybe, then how dare you, a white person, tell me what to do? That makes absolutely no sense, right? Just because they are the descendants of people who have been oppressed, it doesn't justify them harming me. And in very similar fashion, it doesn't justify harming non-human animals. So there are these excuses, mostly kind of leftist excuses, so-called leftist excuses, that I'm just very tired of hearing.
I think they're frustrating because leftists supposedly against oppression, all forms of oppression.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the hypocrisy is what gets me.
Do you see India becoming more vegan in our lifetimes?
But I've already seen it happening. It has become more vegan, at least in the time that I've been vegan, right, which is 5 years. So I'm hoping that this trend continues. It doesn't seem to be it's going in the opposite direction in any manner. And the benefit, or at least not the benefit, I suppose, the viewpoint that I get is that I'm able to see what happened in Western countries, how that progressed. And I'm seeing that kind of same trend happening in India, where people they use these silly excuses it's nature, right? Well, it's other animals eat other animals. Right? That's all that you could hear in anywhere in the world if you are talking in the 1990s, maybe even in the 2000s. But in the 2010s, right, people started talking, it's against indigenous culture, and it's against it's colonialism and that kind of stuff. People started talking about that in the early 2010s, I suppose, in Western countries. Now I'm seeing kind of that same shift happening in India. So, and and like more people are, like that happened in the early 2010s in Western countries. Now more people are vegan in Western countries. I'm seeing that kind of shift in excuses happening right now. So I'm hoping that it's going to, like the same thing is going to happen in India, because, well, it does seem like that's going to happen. And this kind of applies more generally. And I kind of dislike this in a lot of other sort of
Contexts.
context, right? Because it just doesn't apply here. Of course, animal exploitation is just a global phenomenon, so that applies, and that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But in some scenarios, it just doesn't apply. So like people would like bring in something like there's in the United States, there's something that's in the media a lot these days is critical race theory. There's that, and people in India, like the leftists in India, are kind of trying to bring that in and kind of trying to directly apply it in the context of the caste system, or in the context of like the marginalization of Northeast Indians. And it just doesn't work, because like although the suffering is very real, right? Although the marginalization is very real, in fact, like it's more severe, I would say. If you want to solve the problem, you can't just import something that I'm not even sure works in a Western context. I'm not even sure critical race theory works in terms of race relations, and you're trying to bring that in already in a completely different context. It's not going to work. So,
Yeah.
but I do see that, and I realize that a lot of what happens in Western countries is kind of imported into India politically and ideologically and that kind of stuff. This probably has to do with how like in social progress in India was, of course, hampered by colonialism. So
Yeah.
maybe that's the explanation for this delay. But yeah, that happens, and that happens at a faster rate now because of the internet and social media. So I'm hoping that that's the same thing is going to happen, which relating to veganism and animal rights. I would hope that the vegan movement and the animal rights movement, it kind of like makes clear where it comes from, right? Because like in the past, for example, civil rights movements and racial justice movements, they have been sort of hijacked, I've noticed, by religious people. And like the abolishment of slavery, for example, um, like in any part of the world, right? Be it in India, where like, oh, by the way, like most people don't know this. So like the British Empire enslaved Indians, right? So there's that. And the abolishment of slavery here of Indians, or the abolishment of slavery in the United States of primarily black people. Most of that was that arrived from secular means, right? And like but today people claim that it was done on the basis of like religion, on the basis of Christianity, like and while there were religious people who opposed slavery, and they were on the kind of losing end of a theological debate, right? Because the Bible, at least in a straightforward reading, it condones slavery in sort of many parts, right? You can interpret it in different manners, and you can arrive at different conclusions, and that's fine. But at that time, they were sort of at the losing end of a theological debate. But now today, people say that slavery was, we were able to abolish slavery because of the Bible, because like there's one verse that says treat everyone as like created in the image of God and that kind of stuff. But there are specific verses about slavery which condone it, or at least don't completely condemn it, right? There are restrictions, but the only acceptable restriction on slavery is a complete condemnation of it, to say that it's completely unacceptable. So yeah, that went on, and like today, like religions claim that they provide the grounds for human rights, and I fear that in the future, the same thing is going to happen of animal rights, when the animal rights movement is mostly from secular people, right? For example, one of the most influential books on animal rights would be Peter Singer's Animal Liberation. And of course, he did not appeal to any religion in writing that. And I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty I don't think he's religious. So there's that. But anyway, even if he were religious, he did not kind of appeal to that in his book. and
Yeah.
like most vegan activists and people with largest audiences, they don't appeal to religion, right? So I hope that we can kind of ground this. The animal rights movement is indeed something that comes from secular means, right? And a realization of people, and not some kind of divine instruction, because it's not.
Let's go on to plugging your channel then. So tell us about your channel, where we can find it, and about anything you've got coming up.
My YouTube channel is Soy Theist, right? And that will be sort of tagged in the title of this video, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that you can easily click there to find it. And the same spelling, right, of Soy Theist, you can just copy that and like paste it onto any social media. And if I'm there, you'll find me there. So my YouTube channel name is the same as my Instagram handle and my Twitter handle. And although I don't use Clubhouse, my username is the same there. And like I also have a website, which is soytheist.com. And what you would find sort of different on my YouTube channel is that I approach these matters with a very straightforward approach. And on YouTube, I would those would be my more collected thoughts. I would think about it in great detail, and maybe think about it for like an hour, 2 hours, and I collect my thoughts, organize them, and like post them there and create a video talking to a camera. On Instagram, those would be my more candid thoughts about issues that I don't post onto YouTube, because I think like they're too short to be posted on YouTube. So on Instagram, it's my more candid thoughts. On YouTube, it's my more collected thoughts. But of course, I'm focusing primarily on YouTube these days. Like I've posted maybe 5 videos, full-length videos during June, and on Instagram, I'm pretty sure I did not post even that many pictures during June. So
Okay.
So there's that. I'm focusing more on YouTube right now.
If you would like to check out Aditya's content, that name again is Soytheist, Soytheist, and that's on YouTube primarily, as well as Instagram and Twitter. Thanks a lot for listening to this episode, and I'll see you next time.